Ігор, ви чуєте мене?
Так, чую, так.
Та, ну я ж вам не потрібна, я сьогодні пасивна.
Ale tak, czekamy Pani Marto i czy Aileen już z nami?
Ага, пані професор już jest. Ага. Dobrze, to my czekamy w takim razie Pani Marto. Tak.
Dzień dobry, czy mnie słychać?
Dzień dobry, tak, słychać, wszystko w porządku?
Okej. O. To co, Pani Igorze, możemy zaczynać? Aileen, I will use Polish for a moment, okay? And then I will introduce you in English.
Of course, take your time.
Okay.
Tak, możemy zaczynać.
Dzień dobry, witam Państwa bardzo serdecznie na naszym przedostatnim spotkaniu w ramach naszego programu stażowania.
Доброго дня, шановні учасники, вітаємо вас на сьогоднішньому нашому передостанній зустрічі нашого стажування.
Dzisiaj będziemy mieli nieco inny typ zajęć, bowiem warsztat i prowadzony w innym języku niż dotychczas, bowiem w angielskim.
Сьогодні будемо мати трошки іншого типу зустріч, тому що наш лектор буде говорити англійською, це буде більш таке практична інформація.
I dzisiejszy warsztat jest poniekąd kontynuacją tego, o czym mówił pan profesor Sawicki. Otóż on poruszał zagadnienia czysto techniczne związane ze składaniem naszych manuskryptów do zagranicznych czasopism, natomiast dzisiaj pani Aileen McKay powie nam od tej strony językowej, redakcyjnej, jak powinien wyglądać dobrze przygotowany manuskrypt.
Якщо пан професор Савіцький вже нам говорив, розповідав так, з точки зору технічних питань, як треба подавати для публікації хороші тексти в рейтингові часописи, то сьогодні пані Aileen McKay нас ознайомить більше з такою точкою зору мовною, якою ж має бути мовна сторона нашої статті, якою мовою має бути вона написана.
Proszę Państwa, jest to wybitna specjalistka w tej dziedzinie.
Шановні товариство, це дуже значна і відома особа і спеціалістка в цій сфері.
Redagowała teksty i książki, tak, dla takich wydawnictw jak Routledge, Palgrave.
Вона редагувала книжки для відомих видавництв як Routledge, nie usłyszałam, przepraszam. Palgrave i Palgrave.
A także, proszę Państwa, teksty, manuskrypty do bardzo wysoko punktowanych czasopism z Impact Factor.
А також, звісно, є манускрипти до дуже високорейтингових різних часописів та журналів.
Mogę powiedzieć tak, wszystko jest zgodnie z prawdą, ponieważ sama pracuję z Aileen już od kilku lat, że każdy tekst potrafi ona wznieść na wyżyny tego, że nawet najbardziej rygorystyczny redaktor ten tekst przyjmie.
Хочу сказати, що я вже багато років з пані Aileen співпрацюю, і вона кожен текст може таким чином підняти на такий високий рівень, що будь-який редактор готовий його прийняти.
A teraz pozwólcie Państwo, że po angielsku oddam hołd naszemu gościowi, przedstawię po angielsku i oddam głos już pani McKay do przekazania jej olbrzymiej wiedzy Państwu.
А тепер дозвольте, я вже перейду на англійську мову і передам уже слово нашій шановній лекторці, і щоб вона почала свою лекцію.
Okay, so good afternoon. Welcome to our next webinar in our internship on teaching and research in a contemporary university, challenges, solutions, and perspectives. During our meetings, we discuss a lot about scientific writing, which is an integral part of every scientist's work. We talk about how difficult it is to publish an article in a good scientific journal with a high impact factor. That is why today I have invited a special guest who is a fantastic expert in this field. I assure you, she is able to polish every text in such a way that any editor, even the most strict one, will accept it. This magical expert is Aileen, a language editor, writer, social activist, fighter for women's rights, and privately my good friend who generally supports me in a gentle way, but if necessary, will push me to fight for my dreams in reaching for the best publishers. Aileen, over to you.
Oh, what a beautiful introduction. It's so lovely to be here. And I'm just going to begin with a little bit of fumbling around technology just to make sure that I'm sharing my screen with you guys properly. So please just bear with me one moment while I make sure that I'm doing that, because what I would really like to do is show you just part of my screen, so that I can talk to you all and hopefully you can see me and hear me okay at the same time as you have my presentation. So do you currently see my PowerPoint screen and you can at least hear me? Is that working for everyone?
Yeah, perfect.
Brilliant, brilliant. That is good news for me. Okay, so as Marta has said, my name's Aileen, and I just wanted to start with the tiniest bit of housekeeping just so that we're all on the same page. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you for having me, of course, and thank you to all of you for being here, because I think it's really amazing that we can take this time just to connect and to reflect on our professional practice, our academic practice, and how we can help each other to improve. So yes, I really appreciate your presence here, and you're all actually doing this perfectly already, but just to say that I would recommend staying on mute for now, and then if you have a contribution you wish to make, and there will be plenty of opportunities for that, then just take yourself off mute whenever you're ready. And on that note, if you do want to make a contribution but going on video and speaking up just isn't your style, then please don't worry. Do instead just type into the chat function and I'll be able to pick up your comments from there, because I really do appreciate you all pitching in. We'll get a lot more out of it that way. And then to kind of summarize what we're going to cover today so that you know what you've got lying ahead. I'm going to start, if you'll indulge me, I'll just tell you a little bit about who I am, where I come from, my background, just so that you have a clear sense of what kind of perspectives I might be bringing to my work, which is something I will go on to ask you to do the same. So I'll start by leading by example. And then we're going to move over, we're going to take a slightly unorthodox approach to academic or scientific writing. We're going to start by going back to the very core of the idea of storytelling, because in my opinion, that's actually at the core of what we do as academic writers, as editors, and even as readers. So we'll do that so that we can then transfer that over to academic writing and research. And then once we're over to this topic of academic writing, I'm going to be able to give you 4 key troubleshooting areas to help you really target your efforts today. So have your note-taking implements ready for that, because that's where you're going to get something a bit more concrete to take away with you. And at the end, if at all possible, if we manage to get through all of that in the time that we have together today, of course, I'm really open to taking your questions at that point as well. So, as I mentioned, I'm Aileen, and I wanted to just explain a little bit about where I come from. So, geographically, I come from Scotland. I come from the very north of the country, and this is a photo that I took when I was cycling around one of the islands to the northwest. So you can see it's a very wild and beautiful place. And then I lived in Glasgow, the city of Glasgow in the south of the country, for almost 10 years before moving to Berlin. Although I am actually back in Glasgow today, so you're getting a broadcast live from Scotland anyway. And as Marta said, what I do in my work with her is that I really develop and polish ideas and work that her and or colleagues are working on. And that'll take place whether it's at the initial idea stage or at a final draft ready for submission. I'm there at whatever step of the way I'm needed to offer support and insights and recommendations. And just like I do with Marta, this is a kind of function that I offer for all of my amazing clients. And I wanted to give you a little taste of where the people that I work with are based or come from. So of course we have Poland and Ukraine. We also have Hungary, Germany, Catalonia, Scotland and England, France, Italy, Syria and South Africa, and many other places over the years as well. And the roles that I take on for people are as an editor, a mentor, and as a consultant. So really just whatever people need me for, that's where I slot in. And as I mentioned, I'm this person who guides a client or a student from the kind of the idea stage right through to the final complete piece of work. So I've really seen text and academic writing in every form that they can take, right from that kind of aha moment through to the oh my gosh, I've got too many ideas. How will I fit this into the word count? Through to the construction, the editing, the refining, and the submission. So that's my background and the formats that can take. Sometimes I'm helping people with something formal like a dissertation or a thesis. I've also helped people with biographical works. And I wanted to share this photo, not just because it's cute, but I've recently co-authored a text in Germany on the topic of men and feminism and the relationships between the two. And this is a photo of our youngest team member. So I thought that was quite sweet to share. And to round things off, I also do a little bit of consultancy work across topics like literature and communications and feminisms, offering workplace communication strategies sometimes, or manuscript feedback. And occasionally I do make an appearance on the television or the radio as well. So that is quite enough about me. And I want to turn this over to you guys. So we're going to start just doing this writing or typing. You don't have to put this in the chat or share it with the group at all. But I would like you just to take some time reflecting on who you are, kind of like I've just done. Although, of course, please do it in your own way. Think about the person that you are and the parts of your life that make up that amazing person. And just a couple of questions to give you prompts there before I go quiet for a couple of minutes and just give you time to do it. So questions you could reflect on would be, who are you? What makes you unique? What makes you a worthwhile person to listen to? What makes or what parts of your identity make your papers, your publications worth picking up even before I read the first sentence? So again, why am I listening to you? And to do this, you might reflect on things like your experiences with physical and mental health, where you're from, the time that you live in, the era that you live in, the part of the world that you live in, your politics, the things you care about on a deep level. So as I say, that's absolutely plenty from me. And I'd like to just give you a moment to reflect on these parts of yourself, both just as a person, but then also as a person who writes academic papers. So have a little think about that, and then we'll come back together and move forward in a minute or two. Okay, great. Thank you for taking that time. And of course, this is an exercise that you can develop and continue, so there's really no end point on it. But I just wanted to break the ice there, get the ball rolling. And the reason that I'm really getting you to reflect on these parts of yourself now, right as we start our session, is because all of them have an influence over how you write, the work that you produce, and what you share out into the world with your academic writing. Okay, and I can see that I have something in the chat. Yeah, cool. Hi, Svetlana. So nice to see you there. And you're from Crimea and Kiev now. So yeah, this is something where perhaps your location has an influence on the work that you share with the world, or your heritage influences how you frame your academic papers. Yeah, so thank you for sharing. That's something to reflect on. So this kind of links me on to my next point, which was just to say that neutrality doesn't exist. And I'm mentioning it because I think you'll know this from reading so many scientific papers. We're kind of obsessed in this part of the world with this idea of neutrality or detachment. And of course, we can achieve that to some extent, but because of everything that we've just reflected on and shared there, it's actually humanly impossible to be truly neutral or truly detached from the work that we're producing. And in my opinion, I think the world would be pretty boring if we did try and aim for that anyway. So I'm bringing it up because actually it's something that you can work with and be conscious of instead of trying to shy away from or hide from. And I'm sorry, I'm just trying to remove the toolbar from the bottom of my screen because it's actually covering my notes and I don't know how to do that. So what I might need to do is just bear with me one moment. It's just popped up unexpectedly. And I will just reduce this and hopefully it's still good quality. Is the image still good quality for you all? Just shout if it's not okay. Yeah. Okay. So it was just to say here that there's only one of us, and we are, of course, going to write as that person. So now what we're going to do is, as we've just seen in the chat, we're going to start linking up the parts of yourself that you've just identified with aspects of your academic work. And to do that, I wanted to just share a little example of my own. So I'm queer, I identify as queer, and in my academic work, whether that's writing or editing, as a queer person, something that I'm really, really conscious of is editing in a way that's very purposefully inclusive and doesn't assume that someone is cisgender or heterosexual. So, for example, a really simple way that I might do that is just to refer to parents instead of a mother and a father at every instance that these phrases come up. Or another example is that instead of saying he or she every time I want to just refer to a person, I could just say they, because what that does is it includes everyone who's he or she or anyone else. So actually all genders are just really naturally included in this way. But it's also really, from a linguistic perspective, it's very slick as well as being inclusive. And these things are so, so easy to do, and they're actually more factually accurate, but they make space for everyone at the same time. So that's just a couple of examples coming from my own personal identity and how that feeds over into my academic work. So going back to you then, again, we're just going to take another minute. And after this minute, if you'd like to share, again, please feel really free to do so. Think about how one of the things that you've just reflected on or written down about yourself could influence your academic work. Oh, sorry, that's wrong tab. There we go. And just think, okay, I've identified this aspect of my personality. What impact could that have on my work? So we'll just take a moment and then go from there. Okay, great. So if anyone wants to pitch in, please feel free to do that either by just unmuting and speaking up or going into the chat. I'll just give you a moment to do that. And if no one wants to share, that's fine as well, but there's a little space for that just now. Okay. Great. And again, just like with the last exercise, this is an exercise that you can do honestly at any time. And I'd really recommend keeping as an ongoing active part of your practice as an academic and scientific writer. So yes, we've started it today, but please keep up the good work with these reflections and thinking about yourself and how that feeds into your work. Okay, so now let's move along to thinking about writing. And actually, here's a little photo from Berlin last summer when everything was sunny and there were leaves on the trees. And I was able to do the editing work I was actually doing for one of Marta's upcoming publications in the sunshine. It's a very different season now. So, like I mentioned at the start, in any piece of writing, you as a writer, whether you're writing a play or you're writing an essay or a thesis, you're telling a story to your readers. You're a storyteller. And so far, we've just had a little think about the types of storytellers that we might be, thanks to the lives that we've led so far that have brought us here and now. So even if you are writing something that's highly scientific or formal, like a literature review, something very structured, you still are taking your reader, the person who's reading your story, if you like, through a walk through your mind. So just keep that here. And in this form of storytelling, so academic writing, like we're talking about today, you're going to be using a really specific set of tools as a storyteller. And here's just a few examples of those tools that you'll be using. So in my view, they include things like precision, rigor, data, logic, references, clarity, persuasion. So these are your tools as a storyteller of the academic or scientific variety, if you like. And then, like any writer or any storyteller is going to have, you've also got listeners or readers. So that's the people that when you submit or you publish your paper, that's where it goes to. That's the human beings at the other end of this transaction, this journey that your work goes on. And it's a world that you, the writer, and your reader do actually share, even if you never meet in person. It's this amazing connection that might exist only because you published this piece of work. So with that in mind, it's going to help you really write something that lets the reader follow you. And there's more on that later, so don't worry about that idea. But I just wanted to flag up now, kind of from a political perspective, as I think so many of us are just all too aware, the world that we live in as writers and as readers today is full of brilliance and joy, but it's also facing countless intersecting problems that do need tackling in our lifetimes, whether that's war and invasion, it could be the patriarchy, it could be the climate crisis. And this list, sadly, is just the start. And these are just a few of the things that we're facing right now. So I wanted to explain where I was coming from with that, because my belief is that if we're undertaking academic writing here and now in the 21st century, then we should be using it to try and explore and open up to something bigger than ourselves and our kind of most immediate lives. And thinking of this bigger perspective, then, to put names to this idea, some of the thoughts I had when we're thinking about how our writing can zoom out and engage with the bigger picture, we might think of things and values like humanity, peace, progress, or sustainability, some of those really big things that matter to all of us and help us to live better, more peaceful lives. And again, no pressure to share, but of course you're really welcome to if you want to. What core values might you add to that list of bigger things that academic or scientific writing has the potential to speak to, either directly or indirectly? What would you add to this list? So just take a moment just now and feel free to write something down or pop it in the chat, and then we'll get into the technical stuff. Okay, and just to finish off this section, is there anything that anyone would like to share on this topic, either in the chat or over video? Okay, so thank you for taking on those reflections with me. And this is just to kind of highlight that whether or not we have the exact same core values, I think in this Zoom room, we might have different core values, or we might have the same ones, or we might have the same ones, but with a different order of priorities. Even so, I think we can probably agree that it's these things and these types of things that make what we do worthwhile, whether we're academics, students, publishers, mentors, consultants, researchers. And these values can be something of a guide, something of a guiding light that gives us purpose and direction and drive in our academic and scientific writing. So, to summarize so far, I would like to suggest that academic or scientific writing is your core principles, or the things that really matter to you, like we've just reflected on, plus storytelling. So to dig a bit deeper into that idea of storytelling, we're just going to take a couple of minutes and have a think about what really good quality storytelling looks like to us. So have a think about maybe one of your favorite books, one of your favorite films, a Netflix show that you love to binge, just these stories that you come back to time and time again. And have a think about what it is in these stories that makes them so great. And a couple of prompts I've suggested here would be something like, is it the characters that you care about? Or is it that the setting is colourful and rich? Or is it that you just find it entertaining? Maybe it's funny and it gives you a laugh and distracts you from day-to-day stressors. So have a quick think. If you want to share anything in the chat, as ever, you're very, very welcome to, but no pressure if you just want to keep it private. What is it about your favourite stories that makes you like them so much? All right. So shifting over, we're going to pull these reflections and these ideas over to the world of academic or scientific writing, since that's what we're here to talk about today. And what I wanted to highlight, first of all, is that even although your favorite stories, whether that's a TV show or a movie or a comic, might have a very different function to a scientific paper that you're writing, they still have a really similar core in that there's a writer or a creator, and this is connected through the text or the show or whatever it may be to the reader or the viewer. So in both types of storytelling, this is what's going on. And we can take lessons from our favorite shows, our favorite films, and think about how that might work in an academic context. So I'll just give you a couple of examples to suggest to you what I mean. If you were thinking about how you enjoy the costumes or being caught up in the drama of your favorite soap, for example, then a way that that might carry over to your academic work is understanding that, okay, well, I enjoy the costumes and I enjoy the drama on screen. So when I'm writing a paper, I need to create a really smooth argument that's going to sweep my reader along with me, just like the plot of a drama does. And of course, they are different. They are using different devices and different genres. But again, this core that I've been asking you to think about is still the same. Okay, so that's just one little example there. And another one could be that you've thought, okay, well, in my favorite novel, the characters are really, really important to me and I really care about them. So then in a scientific paper, you could think, well, I understand this about my favorite novel. So in my scientific paper, I need to find ways to encourage my reader to care about the subject that I'm sharing with them. So that's one way that you can make that conversion. And just in the interest of time, I won't ask you to sit and do this right now, but I really invite you to do it any other time that you feel like you want to, is just think, what conversions can you make from the stories that you already enjoy over to the academic and scientific writing that you're producing as a writer yourself? Okay, so now that we've talked about what works well in storytelling and a little bit about what works well in academic writing, we're going to spin it round and we're going to have a think about the blockages which can interrupt this kind of flow when we are creating academic texts. And sorry, I'm just, for some reason, Zoom's just giving me this chat just now, and I'm so sorry, I'm only just seeing your amazing comments. Hello, Ola and Katrin. Hello, Marta and Irene. And I'm seeing that you all have such interesting areas, from the history of philosophy of education to biology, cognitive linguistics, linguistic culture, social linguistics, chemical technology, engineering as education at universities, the research teaching nexus, teacher education, teacher professional development. Brilliant. I mean, this is absolutely fascinating. Oh gosh, I just want to chat to all of you and hear more about it. And thank you to Svetlana for sharing these ideas around, just going back to the values for one moment. So she's mentioned integrity, humanism, and the joy of knowledge. I absolutely love that. Thank you for sharing. And sorry that for some reason Zoom just didn't notify me that it was there. Okay, so what we're going to do going forwards now is I've got 4 pieces of academic advice that should help you on a technical level. We're going to whiz through them as best we can. And at the end of each one, if we've got time, I'll leave space for you to reflect on how you could implement it concretely in your own practice. But I'm just going to apologise in advance in case we have to move a little bit faster. And if that is the case, I really invite you to do that reflection for yourself at any time at all. So without any further ado, we'll jump into my first piece of advice that I would love to share with you today. And this piece of advice is, say what you really mean. And I know this might sound obvious. I'm kind of thinking as I read this out loud, oh my gosh, these are really people who understand so much about the world, and I'm sitting here giving you the most basic advice. But from my position as an editor, I cannot tell you how often this is the advice that I would give so many of my wonderful students and clients, is just to say what you really mean, because you wouldn't really believe how often a brilliant idea or a brilliant and important concept just gets lost through indirect, long, wordy phrases where I'm left trying to follow the meaning and aha, finally I can pinpoint it and pull it out and let it shine. So say what you really mean. And thinking back to the positive qualities that we just picked out of our favorite books and films, part of all of that joy is that we just get swept along. Our favorite film or our favorite Netflix show really, it just sort of takes care of us. It doesn't ask us to rewatch it and reread it until we get frustrated just to understand the basic meaning of it. Of course, we might get something new by rewatching it, but it's more for pleasure. The actual basic comprehension, our ability just to follow it along is easy because the show or the film is just saying what it means. So I'm giving this advice to you as well for your academic writing. So to break it down a little bit further then, we can ask how? How do we go about saying what we really mean? And one example is to avoid using the words this and it as far as you possibly can. Of course, sometimes you will just need to use those words and no worries. But if you can find another more accurate or more specific way to say this or it, I promise you, this will elevate your work almost instantly. So an example of a phrase might be, this shows that, or it suggests that. But as your reader, or as your editor in the work that I do, a phrase like this shows that, or it suggests that, isn't actually taking me through and carrying me through your line of logic. It's leaving me to think, wait, what does this refer to? And what do they mean by it? Hang on, what was the previous sentence? And I'm having to do a lot of work, a lot of heavy lifting there. And it's vague. It leaves me thinking, wait a second, did I just read that? No, I'm not sure. So if you can find a more accurate way to say that, for example, just very literally and transparently stating exactly what you mean by the word this, you could say, this new school of thought shows that, or this limitation in government policy suggests that. So you see how immediately this is so much more accurate, descriptive, and it really pinpoints exactly what you wanted to say and gives you a lot more power and nuance as a writer. So that's one piece of advice there. And here's just a slightly fuller example from something I edited recently. I'll just quickly read you the original, and then I'll flag up some of the issues among it. I've highlighted those in blue, and then I'll talk you through the edits I made, just so you can see the difference, just to see a full worked example. So here's the original. Considering the situations and perspectives of teacher education and the selection of teaching staff in the transition conditions, it could be concluded that it was burdened by the lack of standard requirements for their education, which resulted in the phenomenon of negative selections for the teaching profession. Okay, so overall, to me, the sentence is pretty interesting. There's lots of ideas there. I'm thinking, great, I want to learn more about it. Fascinating, tell me more. But the actual sentence for a reader is quite hard to follow because there's a lot of uncertainty and lack of detail. So I could ask, what does situation and perspectives mean? This is very vague. The idea of transition, well, a transition from what to what? It's not clear. In the middle there, we've also got it and it, but the two its refer to two different things, and I'm not sure which is which, and it would be so much clearer if the writer just stated exactly what they meant by it. And again, negative selections, well, says who, negative for what? It's really not clear. So here's an edit that I recommended to this writer. Again, I'll just read it out really quickly for you. Considering the discontinuities and volatility marking Serbia's teacher education sector, including the process of selecting prospective teaching staff, it is perhaps unsurprising that the lack of standard requirements for candidates' education resulted in poor selections of personnel for the teaching profession. So you can see that I've changed quite a lot there, but kept the core ideas and added clarity. So just to show you the kind of the edits that match the problems that I highlighted on the previous slide. At the start, I've swapped situation and perspectives, which I felt was very vague and kind of neutral. I've swapped that for discontinuities and volatilities. So I've actually named the issues or the characteristics. And I've also added the geographical context of Serbia. This was a paper about Serbia, so it made sense to really highlight that there rather than leaving it open-ended and vague. And then lastly, this idea of poor selections. As an editor, I've tried to make it clear that it's actually about the system of how prospective teachers are selected, rather than blaming somehow the student teachers themselves, as I felt the original had. So I've pulled it up to kind of a systems level critique, and we'll delve into that a little bit in point 4. But yeah, so that's just a few things of what I've tried to do there. So I've tried to be specific and direct at every opportunity. And in my opinion, the edit ends up sounding more confident and therefore more trustworthy and persuasive. Okay, so point 2 is we're thinking about how we can take our readers along with us and create a flow from point to point so that they can follow very easily. And when we fail to do this, what we usually demand of our readers is that they make a sudden leap in logic. And this can feel very uncomfortable as a reader, and it doesn't really give them much motivation to kind of stay tuned in, to stay on board with your argument. So as an academic author, as a scientific writer, your job is to create a really nice flowing line that takes them by the hand and walks them through your argument and gives them every reason to stay on your side and to buy into your argument. Okay. I'm just eyeing up the time. I think it is worth doing this little exercise, but I won't turn it around to too much reflection. I'll just kind of talk you through it. So I wanted to give you an idea of how it feels when you're presented with a text that just doesn't have much logic in it, and that flow is not very present. So I'm sure there's a Ukrainian version, but in English or in Scotland, we have a folk tale called Red Riding Hood, and it's the story of the girl who goes through the forest to visit her grandmother. And the grandmother's not there, but there is a wolf. And the little girl is very brave. She kills the wolf, and everyone lives happily ever after. So I've written this story in just 4 short sentences, and I've done it in a way where there's kind of lots of logic missing. So we'll read it quickly and we'll just see, okay, this is a text that's forcing the reader to make a lot of jumps. So here we go. Red Riding Hood was a bold, brave girl. She went to visit her grandma. There was a wolf. Red Riding Hood killed the wolf and escaped. And okay, so a lot of the basic info is there, but it's very short and sharp, and there's no real connections, and I'm struggling to form bridges. For example, why am I being told that she's brave at the start? If she was only going to visit a grandma, surely a loving grandparent, why do you have to be brave to go and visit grandma's house? And then where did the wolf come from? And why did she kill the wolf? So there's so many questions there because of this lack of logic in this version of the text. But if I add some words in, I can offer my reader some logic. So here's the version with those little connections made more fully. Red Riding Hood was a bold and brave girl. One day she went to visit her grandma, who lived on the far side of the deep, dark forest. So already I kind of know why she's brave, because she's got to make this journey to go and visit grandma, right? But when she got there, she couldn't find her grandma. Instead, there was a wolf. So I know that she was expecting grandma, but there was a wolf instead. Gathering her courage, Red Riding Hood killed the wolf and escaped. So I get to know what happened to Red Riding Hood at the end and how she managed to kill the wolf. So, and also why. So there's some more connections made there now, and it's so much easier to follow because the logic has really been considered and invested in. So this same principle applies to your academic writing. You need really clear connectors to make sure that your sentences can be followed by your reader. For example, if there's a causal connection between two sentences, then you should make that clear. You could say because, and that really creates a nice bridge there. Or if you've got a pivot or a contrast between two sentences, then you could use however or on the other hand. And these little words, although they're small, do so much to help your reader just follow through and stay on your side from start to finish. Okay, so I think just to keep things moving, I probably don't need to give you this example from an academic paper, but it was just to say that here we've got two sentences in the original, where you've got the government setting the policies in the first sentence and the head teacher deciding how the budget's spent in the second sentence. And then in this first edit, I've said, although the head teacher decides the budget, this is only possible once the government has set the policy. So I've used the links although and this is only possible to show that the government has power over the schools and therefore over the head teacher. But then a completely different edit would let me actually give more power to the head teachers. So it says the government does set the policies for national spending. However, ultimately, the head teacher is the one who decides the local budget. So by using two very different links, I was actually able to shift around the power in that sentence, one where the government had the power and one where the head teacher had the power. And that was just all down to the linking. So I wanted to show you that just to understand a little bit about how we order our ideas and how we link them together can have such a big impact on how your reader is going to understand power dynamics and hierarchies. And that's really important. And again, for time, we're just going to skip over this part and on to number 3, which is to declutter. And this piece of advice is about clearing out your draft to leave space for the best words that you've written, to let them breathe and to let them shine and to let them really come through. And another way of expressing this idea would be to think about quality being more important than quantity. And of course, I know we have word counts to hit and all of that kind of thing, but quality really is the most important thing. So in other words, it's about cutting out what's not necessary. And I will be the first to say, as someone who also writes, decluttering or editing or cutting down is so much easier to do on work that's not your own. It's so much easier to do this on someone else's text because we just feel less precious about it, don't we? So a couple of bits or tips of how you can achieve that on a practical level is, one would just be to team up with a colleague or a friend and to offer to cut bits out of each other's work. And I'm sure that's something that perhaps you do already, but just because it is often easier to do when it's not your own work, you can definitely take advantage of that and have someone that you trust return the favor. And if that's not your style, perhaps you do prefer to go solo, then what you could do is sit with your work and read it out loud off the screen or off the page. And the reason I suggest this is because reading it out loud kind of creates a little bit of distance between yourself and your work and just gives you that opportunity to edit a little bit more ruthlessly. And when you've done that, your text, your finished piece of work is going to feel so much lighter and easier to read, and your reader is going to be able to skim through that uninterrupted by unnecessary clutter. And like I've said before, the easier it is for them to read, the more likely they are to be on your site. So we'll just give one quick example to give you an example from an academic text. So this is from a paper on teacher education and legislation, and the original said, in accordance with the enrolment quotas determined by the decision on enrolment passed by the Minister of Education for each school year. And here I've highlighted what in my view I would count as the essential concepts. I've put them in red. So the idea of in accordance with enrolment quotas, Minister of Education, and the fact that it's each school year. And this highlighting is something that you can actually do with your own work or a friend's work. Just highlight the key ideas so that when you go to cut, you know the parts that you need to preserve and you know where you've got space to get rid of any excess. Okay, so here is one example of how you can preserve the key ideas, but as you can see, cut down from 4.5 lines to 3. So in accordance with the enrolment quotas passed by the Minister of Education for each school year, that's a much shorter way to put this, or even shorter is in accordance with the Minister of Education's annual enrolment quota. So we've gone from 4.5 lines to 2 lines there, but we've not lost a single idea in the process. This one is a little bit shorter. So the original said, since the beginning of the last decade of the past 20th century, Bulgaria has entered a new complex stage of its national development, characterized by many reforms. And I've just gone ahead and highlighted the key ideas there that I'm going to keep intact. And I've also highlighted the fact that this first part is very long, when actually all you need to say is since the early 1990s. So it looks like this. Since the early 1990s, Bulgaria has entered a new complex stage of its national development, characterized by many reforms. Much shorter, much neater, much easier to read. And for the reader, this means that they've still got a ton of energy and patience left to keep reading whatever it is you want to say after that. So again, it's about taking your reader with you, as I've said before. Okay. And to finish up, we're just going to dive into some pieces of writing advice that are, in my opinion, as much political as they are technical. So the main idea here, a piece of advice number 4, is take ownership. Take ownership. And my point here is that when you're writing a text, you're the one in charge. Yours is the voice that the reader's reading. And that's a whole lot of power for you to enjoy. And in practice, this involves a few things, and I'll break that down for you now. So one key thing here, when you're taking ownership of your text, is to really finish off everything that you're saying. Finish it off. And I'm mentioning this just because you'd be amazed how many amazing papers I read, and it gets to the end of the paragraph or the end of the argument or the end of the paper, and it just leaves me kind of on an anticlimax where I'm thinking, well, I've believed you until now, but you've rushed the ending. So it's kind of left me feeling funny about the paper overall. It's kind of ruined my impression of the whole thing. So one simple thing you can do is just remember, again, the reader's got to come with you. You've got to really finish off every single point that you make. So this one is an example that was the last line of a paper I worked on. The pedagogical process should be based on the results of scientific research in key reform areas of reform. They had a typo there, actually. And of course, this is a really valid and interesting point, but they didn't leave themselves any space to unpack it any further and go into any further detail. And the sentence kind of begins in this really anticlimactic way. Whereas if I simply say, ultimately, going forward, the pedagogical process should da-da-da-da, you can see that I'm slowing up into this final sentence, ultimately. And this lets the reader know, it's a signal to them, okay, I'm coming up to the end now, so I really have to pay attention. This is the final point my author is going to make for me. And other kind of classic phrases for doing this would include to conclude, in summary, therefore. All of these phrases help you achieve that kind of push on the brakes. All right. And then our final kind of big question for today is this idea of active versus passive. And I'm bringing this up under the topic of taking ownership of your writing. And I'll show you in a little moment, of course, there is a time and a place for active writing, and there is a time and a place for passive writing. It's not that one is necessarily better than the other, but I do want you to have a think about which is which and when you use them and why, because that really, really matters. So start with passive. It's usually a very common form of writing in a scientific paper. And it just kind of suggests that things have happened. No one did them, but they happened. They somehow just happened, or they just existed, and that's that. And it can be very useful. You'll know this yourself if you're ever writing a methodology. This is exactly how you write, and you should, because that creates a very clear set of instructions for someone else to follow in the future. But if you're writing something more analytical, using a passive voice would be a mistake, because you could accidentally suggest that something that's actually a social construct or has been done by a government leader or the leader of a country just sort of exists, instead of making it clear that this has been done and that therefore it can be challenged and it's actively constructed. So using the passive there would be a mistake, because it wouldn't hold the right people accountable. Which takes us over to active, which does hold people accountable. And from a reading perspective, it's also just more dynamic and lively. And I think most of us would agree it's a little bit more interesting to read as well. I had worked an example with Red Riding Hood again, but I think we really don't have time. So we're just going to jump over to how we can think about active writing in the academic context to finish off. And I've flagged up here that you could use we and us. So I know that it's unlikely that you'll use I, unless you're in the humanities perhaps. But for the fields that I know you guys are active in, I think we and us is probably about as kind of active as that's going to get. But when you do use these phrases, it can be a very useful tool if you use it intentionally, because when you do that, you have to explain who we or us are. You could mean yourself as the writer plus the reader. And if you do that, just to give you one example, that could be very persuasive, because actually you're saying to the reader, I'm going to assume that you agree with me. And that actually strengthens your argument in a kind of slightly sneaky way. So yeah, just to give you that example. And again, the idea of being active and taking ownership of your writing boils down to adding a little bit more detail sometimes. And I've kept decluttered there because we talked earlier about the importance of decluttering and taking out unnecessary words. So by adding detail, I don't mean adding a ton of words. I mean adding important information as best you can. So it's about investing in that quality. You also have an option, again, when you're being active and writing in a way that takes ownership, you can vary your sentence length. And it's not going to be as varied as it might be if you were writing a short story or a play or a poem, because there it's a much more creative and open genre. But when you do play around at least a little bit with sentence length, you can give even academic and scientific work a slight musicality to it, a little bit of up and down, some light and shade, some highs and lows. And a more concrete example would be, let's say you need to give a long, richly referenced list of something. You could follow it up with a shorter, sharper finishing statement. And that would create a little bit of variety for your reader. And again, this just all helps them to stay on your side. Okay. And lastly, again, with this topic of taking ownership, I've kept it to the last because, in my opinion, it is the most important thing, or one of the most important things that we can consider as academic writers and as editors. And this is upholding the agency of others, upholding the agency of others. And this is what I was getting at earlier when I said, pull your critiques up onto a structural level, put it on the shoulders of systems and people with power, rather than individuals who maybe don't have the power or agency to do something. An example of this recently was I was editing for the German Institute for International Cooperation, and they're looking at how technology can help to alleviate or tackle poverty around the world. And the original text was basically trying to suggest that the apps that they had developed in Germany, being so amazing and great, were able to transform the work of farmers in India. And this might be true, but as an editor, I was interested in really upholding the agency of the farmers in India. I didn't want it to sound like the farmers in India were only successful because Germany was so generous as to give an app to these hardworking individuals. So I flipped their sentence around and I said, farmers in India are using an app to and then carried on. So I didn't actually change the information too much, but I did change the presentation with what I hope would be upholding the agency of other people. So this is just an example more concretely from your field, thinking about recommendations that might be given at the ends of papers. You might read something like teachers need to, or teachers should. This is something that Marta and I have come up against so many times. The example I've written is teachers need to devote more time to learning about how technology can enhance their teaching. And you can see here that this is a whole lot of responsibility to put on a group of people who are already very overworked, frequently underpaid. So I thought, okay, well, how can we turn that around? And what happens when we pull it up onto the structural level, the systems level that I was talking about there? So although it does use up more words, it tells us a lot more and it puts the responsibility where it should be. And here's one suggestion that you could use. Local authorities need to offer teachers technology-based ITE and CPD modules, ensuring adequate time and funding for them to fully integrate these technologies into their teaching. Okay, so it's a very similar recommendation, but it's put the responsibility where it should be, instead of piling yet more onto the shoulders of teachers. And one last example, just before we finish off, is this was from a chapter about Croatia and teacher education there. And the original said, pupils belonging to national minorities have the right to primary and secondary education in the language and script of their mother tongue, and they exercise this right pursuant to the Constitution of the Republic of Croatia. And the phrase I want to zoom in on here, thinking about taking ownership, is national minorities. And interestingly and problematically, this phrase is actually pretty standard English from a, let's say, grammatical perspective. It is actually correct. But I want to challenge it because, in my opinion, it suggests that the nation state and being a minority are just kind of natural things that happen automatically, rather than them being a very specific and constructed set of power dynamics that we can, and in my opinion, should challenge. So the edit that I would suggest is this. Furthermore, those pupils whose nationalities are minoritized in Croatia have the right to primary and secondary education in the language and script of their mother tongue, as formally acknowledged by the Constitution. So I've made this idea of being a minority into a verb, not a noun, to show that it's a process, it's something that's done to people. It's not just, you're not just born and you're automatically a minority in some context. You are minoritized by a force that doesn't want you to have human rights. So it's perhaps an oversimplified example, but that was just one that came up and really stuck with me. And I think it's something worth reflecting on. When you have this power of being a writer, how can you uphold agency instead of just kind of letting it go as if that's just the way the world is? Okay, so thank you so much and congratulations for flying through this with me today. I realized that it's a lot to take in, so I really, really appreciate your effort and your energy and your presence. And just to summarize, these are the things that we've covered. You are a storyteller, so say what you really mean. Create that flow, go with the flow. Declutter, so no excess words, really minimize it down to exactly what you want to say. Take ownership and uphold the agency of others. So thank you so much. I will just, and that's my contact details, that's my email there in case I can be of any help. You're very welcome to get in touch at any time at all. I will stop my sharing and come back into Zoom. Hopefully that's working. I think you shouldn't have my screen anymore.
Yeah, everything is okay. So thank you very much, Aileen, for your time, for your sharing your great experience, knowledge, and skills. This is amazing. You know, how can you describe this scientific writing, etc. So this is like a storytelling for us. So thank you very much. The organizers asked me to apologize you that only 12 people were able to attend, this lecture. However, again, these days really difficult for Ukraine because of the Russian aggression. So in Kiev, again, they do not have electricity. I hope that next year we will be able to organize the same workshops for much more people than today, because now I received 2 emails from our participants that they really wanted to join. However, because of these problems, they couldn't. So I hope that we will be able to meet in a better world, hopefully next year.
This is always the goal. No, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. And if I can send slides or a recording, then of course I'm more than happy to do that.
Yeah. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.